I'm Chris Mackowski on location for Emerging Civil War in Doaksville, Oklahoma, just a mile north of Fort Townsend, Oklahoma. This is the site of the last Confederate surrender of the Civil War. Here I am in what used to be known as Indian Territory, now the modern state of Oklahoma. And off the beaten path, place really, frankly, I never thought I'd be able to make it to, and suddenly found myself unexpectedly able to make it out here today, and what a treat. You'll see behind me there is an old house well. Here at Doaksville, it's actually a recreated, or not recreated, but it's an archaeological site that marks the little settlement that used to be here. It was eventually extinguished when the railroad was put in just a few miles south, bypassing Doaksville, and of course then nobody had any reason to stay here when the railroad was much more convenient a little further south. So there are a lot of these old well sites here throughout Doaksville. A couple other foundations off in that direction. For instance, there's an old foundation for the old jail, Old Stone Jail, and some other cool stuff out here. But really what's of note for our particular story are these two monuments here. I'm going to zoom in on them for just a second, if I can be coordinated enough. One of them actually marks Doaksville, a noted town in Indian Territory. And then the other one marks the surrender of Stan Watie, the Indian chief who had served as a brigadier general, highest ranking Native American to serve in the Confederate Army, and a controversial figure. I'll talk about him in just a second. But he came here to turn in his surrender in on June 23rd, 1865. Not because he was holding out or anything like that, but in fact because it just took that long for news of surrenders out east to make their way here. Word finally is going to come up that Kirby Smitham has finally surrendered, so that news is going to come up from Galveston and finally make its way here. And so Stan Watie finally comes to surrender only because he finally got the news. Watie was a pretty controversial figure in the mid-1930s when President Andrew Jackson was trying to advocate the removal of the Cherokee Indians from Georgia out west beyond the Mississippi. Most of the Cherokees said no, but Watie was the leader of a minority band that said, sure, we'll move, and he went along with President Jackson's suggestion. Jackson used that as the excuse to recognize all of the Cherokees agreeing to this agreement that they hadn't agreed with, and sent everybody out west. So that really put Watie in sort of poor standing with a lot of his other colleagues. Some of the other leaders that were involved in that sentenced to death by the Cherokee Nation. Watie somehow managed to survive. When Civil War breaks out almost 2.5 decades later, most of the Cherokee want to stay neutral in the war. Watie's going to lead a minority band of the Cherokee against the United States, allying themselves with the Confederacy. Eventually the rest of the Cherokee Nation will go along with him. But there again causes a division within the nation that becomes quite controversial. Watie will raise the 1st Regiment of Confederate Indians, the first mounted Cherokee infantry. I got to make sure I get that right. He'll lead them into action early on in the war. Places like Pea Ridge, Wilson's Creek, the all-star actions of the Trans-Mississippi. They'll also be involved in a number of other engagements. But by the end of the war, they're basically acting like a band of partisan rangers, similar to the way Mosby out east is acting. We don't actually know how many men he had with him by the time that he surrendered. We do know that it's a mixed band of Indians from a variety of different nations, and they all come here to Doaksville, which at the time was the biggest town in Indian Territory. And it only takes the railroad a few years later to make the place go extinct. Really glad I had the opportunity to get here. Definitely worth exploring. Very exciting, cool to be here. I'm Chris Mackowski for Emerging Civil War.